Uh, this is a dream come true for me, to have Antoinette Harrell here. I've been following her work for years. You know, when I teach my race and racism course, one of the first things I say to students on the first day of class is that it was far worse than you have ever imagined. And that's quickly confirmed when we look at the history of race, we look at facts about spectacle lynchings where human beings were tortured and burned alive. And then they come to Douglas Blackman's work, and Doug Blackman was concerned with the re-enslavement of African Americans in the aftermath of the failure of Reconstruction. And they are shocked when he says that he dates the technical end of slavery to 1941, when the Roosevelt administration cracked down on the practice as part of the war effort. But they are even more shocked when I introduce them to Antoinette's work, because Antoinette's work gleaned in a couple of different ways, one of which is quite unique, gleaned by going through records, old trunks full of fascinating material, but also, very importantly, speaking with elderly African Americans and receiving their testimony of having been enslaved well into the 20th century. I mean, that's another ballgame. And Antoinette has done me the honor of zooming into my class for the last 2 years, and I want to get her again next semester when I teach it again, among many other very important thinkers and researchers in this area. So today, this is a treat. This is a unique experience. Ooh, here comes the water. Come on, you can go through. To hear Antoinette's account, frank, explicit about her work and her findings. So thank you all for coming, those of you who are here in the flesh, and thank you all who are online, who are tuning in to this awesome presentation.
Thank you. I would like to thank Dave and Rob and Lee and the staff for inviting me. There's a saying said, it's the past that shapes the present and the present that shapes the future. I was once told that genealogy is a hobby. I am a descendant of those that was enslaved on my mother's side and my father's side. I didn't find genealogy to be a hobby. It was a necessity for me. The first thing I wanted to do in my research is to know, who am I? The birthright that was taken away from me because of the ugly atrocities of slavery robbed me of that knowledge of self. Who am I? In 1994, my mother started to tell me stories about her ancestors and what she can recall. At first I thought, why is my mother repeating these things that she had told me over a dozen times in one day? But then I finally realized that my mother was trying to give me the keys to unlock what I call knowledge of self. And like any other genealogist, I was happy to meet new family members, find photographs, marriage license, go to cemeteries, and all the things that goes with the study of genealogy. So when I put my hand on that door to learn about self, I realized that there was something that was terribly missing and wrong. They talked about the life of sharecroppers, and when my family received their freedom in 1863, they signed the Freedmen Bureau contracts in 1866 that basically was another term to put them in a new form of slavery. But somehow they worked collectively together and purchased their land. And that was their sign of freedom. Well, As I moved around the state of Louisiana and Mississippi and listened to other people talk about their family history, I soon learned there was a hidden secret in America. What was this secret? What's not in the textbooks that most people who go to Harvard University and other Ivy League colleges wasn't taught? The second coming of slavery. And some books that say it was called worse than slavery. What could be worse than slavery? Well, in slavery as chattel property, they had a reason to protect their property, feed their property, clothe their property. But when slavery was abolished, it had a different look. And I want to take you down that road. And I want to say this, sometimes very emotional. A couple of weeks ago, I was the keynote speaker for HP, and they brought in a counselor for the employees there. But see, I didn't have that liberty to seek counseling for the pain. And as I sit here today, and I'm thinking about all those voices that remain silent due to fear that they may be killed or their children, I dare not be afraid because Harriet Tubman couldn't be afraid. Dr. King couldn't be afraid. All the other pioneering people on both sides of the spectrum couldn't be afraid. I dare not have my voice silent. When they say that critical race theory, say, don't talk about this, you can't talk about this. Why not? It's a part of my history, and it is a part of the history that makes America what it is. Let's take that journey. What's not in the history books? The untold history of involuntary servitude, which was another name for slavery, because no one volunteered to go back in slavery. When did slavery end in America? Like most people, I learned that it ended in 1863, but I learned differently. 1863, 1865, as Juneteenth approaches in Galveston, Texas, is saying we're about to celebrate our history of freedom. The Gullah Geechees in South Carolina told me 2 weeks ago, April the 2nd, we got our freedom in 1865. 1944, 1963, in the height of the Civil Rights Movement. What are we talking about? People still being in slavery. 1973, 2000. Did I miss something? 1973, 2000? Peonage. The system of peonage in the Deep South, and my family left Nancy Mon, Virginia with those that enslaved my family, and we went down to the Deep South. And in the Deep South, in these rural communities, who told them that slavery was abolished? And if so, where would we go? I can only imagine my ancestors just rejoicing and being so happy that they are free, and that they probably danced and cried and became emotional probably for 24 hours and then realized, where am I going to go? We have no food. We have nowhere to go. We have no clothes. We have elderly people with us. We have disabled people with us. What are we going to do? So, as President Abraham Lincoln said, well, we would devise a new contract called the Freedmen Bureau contracts. And I do believe in my research that they didn't make their X. If you can make an X, you can make an A. You can write an A, you can write a B. Even the X was forged, forcing children as young as 5 years old to work on these plantations for the remainder of their life, unless they ran away and found freedom. And as I move around and I met people in the South that was afraid to talk about it, I promised one woman that you will meet in this doc in my presentation, that if she would just talk about it, I would do everything humanly possible to prove that she wasn't alone. I read every book I can get my eyes on, and I read for those that had their eyes pull out their eye sockets because they wanted to read. I read for those that couldn't read and was deprived the privilege of being able to read. I took the plane and I went to Washington, D.C., to the National Archives and looked in the classification record group 50 and 60. So I'm sitting there reading these documents and the tears is flowing down my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was reading. What do you mean the new coming of slavery? They told us we was free. I soon learned it was on paper. The cases that I found revealed that slavery exists in 20 states. How do I know? The records that I'm going to introduce you to will tell you that slavery exists in 20 states. The states that I cover, Louisiana, Mississippi, because that's where my ancestors was in these states here. A true story. May and Arthur is still living. We lost May, and she was the modern day Harriet Tubman because she said, they can't do to me what they haven't already done. At least if I'm gonna die, let me die free. I'm gonna tell it. And we held hands. Now let's tell it together. Well, Hollywood, Bollywood read about my work, and they decided to make a movie without consulting with the real people, and they just visualized what it could have been. Okay, there you go. Thank you.
In our gracious state of Georgia, our God-given land, the Lord has offered domestic livestock. We have to go.
That's the Hollywood version of it, because it really didn't happen like that. When May received her freedom, stole her freedom, no one ever talked to her to ask her what happened. We can cut it. Mm-hmm. We can go to the next one. This is May. May lived a horrible life in Gillsburg, Mississippi. She and her family ran to their freedom in 1963 because she refused to work, and she refused that day, and she knew what that day was going to be. Because if you told a white person that you wasn't going to work, that meant you was going to be killed or beat. She stood up that day, and she ran to her freedom. The time that I spent with May, listening to her story, and how they had to eat birds, and we can't even imagine trying to eat a little robin or bird eggs just to have food to eat. And I remember one day I wanted to drive to this place called Gillsburg, Mississippi. I was frightened just driving there because it feels like the hair on my arm was standing up because, you know, I had to just go instinctively as to where am I? These places that most of those that was enslaved was in isolated communities. Off the main highway, down those dusty roads, no trespassing signs. This is how they was kept enslaved. The Wall family consists of a father, mother, and 7 children. The 5 older children was the ones that was held enslaved. May and Arthur were sharecroppers in Gilbert, Mississippi. At the end of the crop year, they was told they didn't make money for the pay. They didn't make enough money to pay for the seeds, the tools, and other items. Each year, like most of the people that was enslaved, try next year, you may do a little better, and you can pay off your debt. They never could pay off their debt. First of all, who was going to challenge them? Who was going to challenge the sheriff, the judge, the business owners, the rich farmers? You dare not question them. As May tell it, and this is what she told ABC Nightline, she spent her youth in Mississippi as a slave, picking cotton, pulling corn, picking peas, picking butter beans, picking string beans, digging potatoes, whatever it was, that's what you did for no money at all. Millie and her sister Annie tells of bondage ending in the 60s. Annie is still afraid today. She's afraid to talk about it. She was afraid that day because she thought they was going to kill her. And one day when CNN came to me and they wanted to talk to their father, who was 107 years old at that time, well, he gave me his story. He talked about what he saw, what he went through. He called the names out. And one day while watching TV, he saw this white man on the television, and he thought the man was coming to get him because he shared his story with me. He went into the hospital, and the family banned me for 1 year because they didn't want to lose their father. They was afraid of he was going to have a heart attack. And it was then he said, no, I started talking to her, and I'm going to finish it. Arthur's story. This is May and her 2 brothers. I took them back to Gilbert, Mississippi for the first time in 50 years. And if a picture can tell a story, the fright that was on all 3 of their faces, I couldn't understand that fright, but they knew if anybody passed down the road and saw them, what that could have meant for them. There's only one person that's still living, and that's the man with the dark shirt on. That is Arthur. I'm sorry that Arthur couldn't be here today due to health reasons. But this is in his words.
And we couldn't leave. You know, we was on those people's place I'm telling you about. So I don't know who owned all of them, but Alonzo Gard was the main man that and we couldn't leave. You know, we was on.
We can pull up this video here because I really want you to hear what Arthur has to say. Arthur, well, his father talked about how his uncle had to dig his own grave. And when he dug that grave, he didn't know what he was digging it for, but they shot him because they wanted to have a relationship with his wife, and his wife said no that day. And once again, you don't tell a white man no in the South. What did that mean? He was killed. We can go.
My daddy, the whole family, was held against their will. If you did leave, they either come get you or have somebody kill you or whatever. Jerry Dawson, he lived around the same place we lived at home. He left, they went and got him, brought him back, carried him right down there from his house, killed him, hung him up in a tree, castorized him and hung him up right from his house where his children, everybody could see him. 6.
Most think that the end of the Civil War in 1865 closed the chapter on slavery in the American South, but that's far from the truth. Over the next 100 years, generations of black Southerners were forced to labor against their will. This new form of slavery happened in the shadows of the first half of the 20th century. In Even though civil rights movement began advancing racial equality in the South in the 1950s, these practices continued secretly, making it a difficult history to prove. Today, there's one woman who's dedicated her life to finding this lost history of Black identity. She's been called the slavery detective of the South.
I have been on
Antoinette Harrell, who specializes in finding.
I have been on 5 active plantations in my life. I'm aware of 5 lynchings in my life. And when I say active plantations, I don't mean plantations where people go and listen to someone as a tour guide tell the narrative. I'm talking about people who still live on plantations. Who's afraid to talk about it? In fear of their life. And sometimes it takes me 2 to 3 years to get to know the area, who I can trust, who own who. So my work is double-fold. It's mission work. We're providing food and clothing. For those that are still on plantations. Many a times when I went into these areas, I didn't know if I was going to come back alive. Because I know if I would have got caught back there, what that meant. Cases of peonage, cases located in the National Archives. Letters to the presidents of the United States. Who would have thought that after President Abraham Lincoln emancipated those? Thank you, David. That letters would be written to other presidents asking them to free those that were still in slavery. Files from the Department of Justice, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the FBI files. The 3 presidents that was aware that slavery wasn't abolished. Calvin Coolidge, Warren Harding, and Franklin D. Roosevelt received letters asking that they abolish this new form of slavery. This letter that Calvin Coolidge wrote, this letter was written to Calvin Coolidge in 1927. In Vicksburg, Mississippi, free people are being herded back to the plantation. The planters hold their laborers at gunpoint. I want to go back there. And when I scanned this document at the National Archives, I said, there's going to be people who do not believe this, so let me just scan it in its natural form. And even with what you see, some people still doubt it. And I begin to understand why May said what she said. Who's going to believe me? And I soon learned who was going to believe me when I spoke the truth. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1942. It brings me to mind my mother was born in 1940. So slavery was well and alive. This letter came out of Hiding Valley, Mississippi. 300 to 500 Negroes bound in the shackles of slavery. The plantation is well guarded. Many men and women was killed on these plantations. Letters like this and documents like this made me realize, what am I looking at? Torture, abuse, murders, beatings. I felt, why wasn't this in the history book? Why didn't they talk about this? Why was this the best kept secret in America? 1944, again, Sunflower, Mississippi. William Henry Huff, the director for the Abolished Peonage Committee of America, he was writing, asking the president to end and to eradicate the new form of slavery. Would you please end it? Now, if slavery wasn't in existence, why would we still be asking 3 presidents to end slavery in America? The hometown, the childhood hometown of Kosciuszko, Mississippi. And this is one of the documents I'll never forget, because when I went to the courthouse and the records was in the attic, and they was told that they don't go in the attic because ghosts is in the attic. My opportunity. I'm gonna go in that attic, I'm gonna make as much noise as I can as the ghost talking. I'm free. And so the one thing I told the ghost, look, I just need you to show me the papers. Show me where it's at. I'm here to set you free. So I just started moving stuff around and making noise to really make them think that ghost was really in the attic. But what was in the attic was these stories that wanted to come out the attic, that they was hiding in the attic. You know, we always think about what's in the attic. Murders was in the attic. Records was in the attic that you couldn't access. This sheriff, he was arresting colored as well as white people on trumped up charges and placing heavy fines to work at the sawmill. And I wrote a letter to Oprah, can you do a segment on this? Never got any reply. But when I was in Zambia, I know I want to get out of there, because when I think about this part of the world, I think about Philadelphia, Mississippi, where those civil rights boys was killed. Once again, my hair stood up on my own, because when I met resistance, when I knew that I was in the courthouse, and I remember this man looking at me, and when he was looking at me, it was like saying, oh, I just wish that we can turn back the hands of time, because you won't be touching those records. So I took my beautiful black golden hand, and I touched all the documents, because I knew that he couldn't do anything about it. But in his eyes, it said, if I could, you weren't the lucky ones. But I made sure I touched those records. Although he didn't like it. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, 1943. When I think about Mississippi, most of us that know anything about Nina Simone, they say Mississippi, goddamn. And Mississippi right now is still trying to turn back the hands of time and walk them back. Come on. Jim Crow, Jane Crow, let's turn back the hands of time. We're back at it again. Now this is what another white man was saying about another white. He said, word has a reputation that any Negro born on his plantation must remain there for the rest of his life in 1943. So that means if a child was born in that plantation in 1943, in 1963, he still was owned by this man. $150 just to be born in the sharecropper's floor or in the cotton field. That's what he was saying. You owe me, and you're not getting away. The subject of peonage required me to travel many dangerous roads and highways in order to conduct my research and interviews. In the course of my research, I feared for my life, but I couldn't think about it. I was on a mission. Why I was chosen? I guess because I was crazy enough or brave enough, wanting to do it. It took a combination to do it. You know, it is what it is. The truth shall be told. In that attic that I was talking about, It was very dark in there, and you can see there was a flashlight. So I'm in this room, and because I do believe in a higher power than myself, I said, Heavenly Father, how do you expect me to find these records in this dark place with no light? And there was a young man named Joshua who was with me. Joshua went to one of the bookshelves, and he pulled the book, and he opened. He said, Antoinette, this is what you're looking for? I couldn't do nothing but cry, because that was impossible with all these books in there for me to see. But what it was for me to find these records on sheriff glass, and the sheriff sent a word to me saying, do not come back. So they end up having to sneak me in the courthouse again. Again, they thought I was the ghost. I'm coming out the attic, and at that time I had 2 legs, so I go to show you how long I've been doing this. But it didn't stop me, because I thought about those that didn't have any legs and want to taste freedom. What does freedom taste like? I couldn't quit. And so my mission took me in many places. And the boxes that you see behind me, we would never see those boxes again, because records move when someone say they move. They lock them away because they got the power to lock them away. When they lock them away, they're locking away the true history that many students sitting in here today really want, the true history. That's what you're paying for. Nobody's giving you your education. This is the part of education that's missing. And once again, those are the boxes. I want you to see them. Boxes of cases of peonage files in the attic. And no one wouldn't find them, because they're not going to let you have access to the attic. Those lonely roads, and many a times I thought about my own children, and I thought it wasn't fair to them that I would put my life and perhaps their life in jeopardy too. But that is the price of freedom. You can't be afraid. Before we go into questions, I just want to say, I often tell my colleagues that we're doing an injustice by not listening to those that lived it. I'm just a researcher. But those that actually live it, and that's not afraid to talk about it. In the climate that we're seeing today and the things that's happening in the deep South, people get more afraid to talk. And it reminds me of what I've heard some of my colleagues say. If I'm gonna die for this cause, at least let my name go down as saying she rung the freedom bell, or she stood for something. She stood for what she believed in. Because if I accept what critical race theory is saying, that I don't want you to talk about this, and it's all because they don't want their children to know what they did, but the children want to know. We can't fix what we don't know. But if we know what happened. Many a days I went home and I was in tears because I couldn't believe what I just saw with my own 2 eyes. And there's a fine line between sanity and insanity when you see this and you have no one to talk to. You have no one to believe what you just saw. Well, me and the bottle of wine got to know each other very well. Because there was no therapy. It's like, okay, is this woman really nuts? Let's lock her up, because nobody knows. She's talking crazy. But sooner or later, there came someone named Justin Former with Vice, and they're saying, oh, there has to be some truth to this. So I guess I can say now they believe it. But we're losing those people like Arthur, like May, who can really tell you what really happened. I am very happy I can sit here right now without crying, thinking about what I have heard them tell me. No one can make these things up. Listen to me dearly. You would have to be in the pits of some evil, dark world to believe or to visualize digging your own grave and witness the killing. One lady tried to get away, and she got away, and in her document, reading the document, the man had tied her up with a trace chain. And when he tied her up, her husband went and got the sheriff. And the sheriff went over there. He said, well, what are you doing? He said, them son of a hens keep running away. He made her let her go, but he went back and got her and put her back on the plantation. One woman, she had her arm beat completely off with a crowbar because she weren't her children. So when I say slavery by another name, as Doug Blackman said, worse than slavery, there's one book, it's only 100 and something pages, and I can't complete reading it because it's too dark and it's too painful, and it takes me in a place where I don't want my mind to go there. I remember when I met this evil atrocity, the one thing I said to those that did these things, I said, you won't live through me because you're not gonna get me to hate nobody. You won't use my body to make me hate anyone. Because reading these things and witnessing these things could make you turn into something that you don't want to be. But then I will be giving life to those spirits again of hatred. I refuse to do that. I refuse to do it. What am I going to gain? What would be my purpose? And then they live through me. And at that time, let hate be buried. That's what we all should be saying. But the true history is not always in a textbook. No, professors do not get, let me just say, they are controlled as to what they can say, what they can teach. I'm free. I can research it. I can tell it. I can write it. I can make films about it because I refuse to be silent. Because if they offered me a job, it's, oh yes, Antoinette, come work here. Then they tell me, well, you can't say that. You can't speak that. And the day that I can't say in my 62 years, it's time for me to leave this earth. Because if it happened, it happened. Can we undo what happened? No. But slavery is still well. Muddy Waters, I want to, before I close out, I met a man named Willie King, and he was one of the finest blues singers in the Mississippi Delta that I met. And he said, Antoinette, he said, Muddy Waters arranged for me to perform on this plantation, but I had to meet them at the store. And when he met them at the store in 1970s now, they blindfolded him. And they picked him up at the store. And they took him to the plantation. And he said, when I got to the plantation, it was like back in the 1800s. And not very long ago, this lady wrote on my page, she went to stay with some of her friends. And she said, now this is in the 90s, 1990s. She said when she got there, she saw the servants. She didn't think too much of it. But then when the person who she was proposing to do business with and say, oh, that's my slaves, she made arrangements to leave their house. And she wrote that under my YouTube page just the last 3 weeks, that she knew what I was talking about. One lady in Alabama, she said, yeah, my grandfather owned slaves in 1980. This lady is not lying. Not only did those that was enslaved talk about it, But there's some who feel like what their ancestors and what their family members did is not right. And it's going to take people to stand up for what is right. Slavery is wrong in any form. It is wrong. And what was done to those like May and like her family is she went to her grave, but she was free because she told her story. She was free. Her sister Annie, she said, all I wanted was some ice cream. And on her birthday, just passed, I took her ice cream because that's all she wanted. Thank you, David. Thank you.
So we have some time for questions and answers, and we have some mics here. I don't know where they are, but we have them. This one here?
The one that you had.
Yeah, it's this one. Anyone? Here's some.
Okay. So you mentioned how, like, obviously these people aren't going to be living forever. How do you hope to continue this work after people like Arthur and others who have stories like him pass?
Oh, there's a lot of people like Arthur, it's just getting them to be not afraid to talk about it. But right now, what we're trying to do is collect the oral histories and have it transcribed and preserve those histories through videos and other documents. But there are so many. It's just finding someone that's not afraid to talk about it. And that's been the whole mission.
Amazing work. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. This is just phenomenal. I just had a quick question. The map you showed of the states where peonage was active, was that just the states that you were aware of, or are there other states where it may also have been active that you just haven't researched yet?
Thank you. That's a great question. The documents that I have, I go according to those documents. And so far, out of all the documents that I've scanned, those are the states that I have identified, but there can possibly be more.
Thank you. I want to add my appreciation for you being here as well. I loved that you ended with a reference to Muddy Waters. And I know that Muddy Waters was also raised on a plantation and moved his way up to Chicago in the early 1950s, late 40s, early 50s. But in the 70s, you said, is when he made that introduction to bring somebody back blindfolded to perform in the plantation. So do you know a bit about Muddy Waters and how did he reconcile that? I'm sure on the one hand he was...
It was his brother, Muddy Waters' brother is the one he sent me to. And when I got there, I guess he was afraid to talk about it because he pretended he didn't know anything as to what I was talking about. And you have to know the Mississippi Delta to really understand how dangerous that could be. But the artist who did the performing, he's the man that will speak the truth.
If you don't mind, a quick follow-up. From your research, do you get a sense that that was a common practice as late as the 70s, or was that a unique?
Oh, no, it was a common practice. It was common. You know, these places are really isolated and far away. Some of these places I've traveled to, there's not one medical clinic, one doctor, not one supermarket. So certainly it was I can see how it could have easily been done, because there's no access when you talk about someone that might own 10,000 acres and his brother owned the next 10,000 acres. Very easy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you also. Thank you very much for the talk. My question is about the Amistad project that you said that last night you were mentioning that you were engaged with some public history project.
Yes, yes.
If you can talk about that.
Yes, I want to donate my documents and these oral histories to the Amistad. I believe that for future studies, preservation, scholars, and other researchers, that it should be preserved somewhere. And the Amistad actually offered to help do the preservation, plus the fact they must have the money to do it. It's money to preserve records and also to transcribe the oral histories.
Harriet, thank you so much. I have so many questions for you, and I have a lot of thinking to do, and beautifully told as well. Have you ever taken on mentees or interns who could learn how to do this work and work with you and carry forward some of this work?
Thank you for that question, because most of the, should I say, those that say they want to work with me, they may work maybe a month, but this is longer than a month. And I personally feel that it would be a loss if somebody doesn't come forward. And I'm hoping that maybe a history department with a university can help. So that's a great question, but the answer is no.
We'll have to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. And that would be a great part of history. That would be, because as you can see that a lot of the records that's in the attic, and in some places they move the records from one place to an annex, and it doesn't mean that you have access to those records. And some courthouses are moving records into repositories that you don't have access to. And certainly there is records with no indexes. So, that's a big portion of history that will be lost.
You mentioned earlier about how this stuff isn't taught in school, and I agree that it should be. How do you think we should go about teaching those things, and because there's obviously it can't be censored, because then we won't truly get all of the information that we need.
I would say that your university right now, and through David, is making that change. Because in the 30 years that I have been doing this work, I can count on one hand the universities that have asked me to speak. I have done more teaching from social media than any university. And I know if I was a student, after hearing this, I would demand from the student unions that this is taught. Because if I'm going to pay for my education, I want to be educated. Bottom line. Students have the power to make that change.
Fall semester, my course.
So Harriet, I'm glad you mentioned social media, because one of the things I was thinking about, the fear that comes with speaking and how hard it is to speak. Could there be a way to develop some kind of social media where people could anonymously go on and tell their story without anyone having to know who they are, even to start to collect some of these, oral histories, just as a thought? I mean, trying to think of ways to help people tell their story who may be scared to tell their story.
Yeah, I think that could be possible, because I do know that because David and I have been working together the last couple of years, That's why I'm here. Other than that, you know, I would prefer to use social media to, and oftentimes when I use social media as my platform, people join in through YouTube or whatever, and they share, and sometimes I'm in contact with those people, but sometimes it may take months for me to, for that person to feel comfortable enough to share and not afraid, and not just being comfortable, but I feel like when they are talking about it, they are going through pain. And so that pain, they may not be ready to revisit that pain. You know, sometimes we try to lock things away as if it doesn't exist. And so sometimes I feel guilty that I am opening up wounds that to get people to relive that part of their life that they're trying to work so hard to forget. But I hope that they will find some way to say, this is necessary. This is true, because some of the people that held people in these conditions, they're still living. Their children are still living. You know, there was a plantation I was on, I've been on there for about 5 years, Ball Ground Plantation, and the guy, Donald, that was in Vice, he still lives on that plantation, and he said that there is a relationship, like a brotherhood between him and the person that owned the plantation. And so there's always that fear, you know. When I leave somebody home or the area, I realize that I'm leaving. They have to still stay there. And so I try not to, I respect people where they are in their spaces, because I don't ever want to have someone to call me and say, you know, they just found this person lynched because they talked to you. So although I feel it's not the friendship that he think or the brotherhood, but I respect the space. And I don't probe too deeply.
Thank you, Antoinette.
You're quite welcome.
Beautiful, haunting and beautiful. Before the program started, we were talking about you have adult children, and I wonder if you would be willing to talk about how this work has impacted them, and how those of us who are working or parenting young people, what message you would want us to pass along.
You choose what you share with them. It's like they know me, but they don't know me. They really don't know what I do sometimes. I often say that my children will learn more about me at my funeral than they would alive. Because the way they see it, they often wonder, why do I do it? You know, and it takes time away from them. It takes time away from my family. And I thought about Dr. King and how young his children was. They got to know their dad through books and through other people. And with my children and my grandchildren, I try to spare them as much as I can. I try to be a mom and not this peonage detective. But I always try to caution them about the areas that they live in a soft way, if there's a such thing. But I couldn't spare the truth. And that's the one thing that I found, that I waited till they got a certain age to talk with them. But I feel like as a black woman in America, we have done our children injustice by not sharing with them the struggles, our children take for granted their freedom, their liberties, because we say to them, well, that's in the past. One of the counties in Mississippi that, Smith County, Mississippi, they just found a young man with his head cut off, the top of his head. And Ben Crump just leaked it to the media probably within the last 3 weeks. His torso was found in one place. His head was found in another place, 25 years old. And I thought about my son. And I thought about Smith County, what I know about the records that led me to Smith County. And when this doctor was holding these little boys enslaved, and when they caught him, he said, we dispose of them in Clarksdale, Mississippi. How do you dispose of a human being? So how can I not tell my children that I've been to 5 lynchings? How can I not? Because they live in a world that we feel like we went through, and I'm a product of integration. I'm a product. And in my household, it has to be a conversation. Because in communities that I've been through, in Sumner, Mississippi, there was a black baby doll hanging from a tree, not very far from where Emmett Till was lynched. And these sundown towns, have you ever heard of sundown town? By nightfall, you better be out of here. And if we Google it on the internet, truck drivers tell you all the time, we was told, get out of here by sundown. So I can't spare my children the truth. I'd rather for them to hear it from me than not to know it all. So if any black person that's listening via the internet, stop trying to save your children from the truth. If they're not getting it in school, they're not getting it at home, certainly not getting it in the churches, where are they going to get it from? Somebody got to tell it. We all have a responsibility. You know, we want to make America great. If we really want to make America great. Now, for some people can say, great again. But as a black person, we might not know what that again is. See, because I'm coming from slavery, I'm coming from Jim Crow, I'm coming from all these things. I'm coming from all these things. But I hope to see it be great. But after watching the news today, we all in trouble. We are all in trouble, really. We're stronger when we stand for truth. This is the truth.
Last call, as they say in the pub.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, this isn't really a question, it's more of a comment. I just wanted to express my gratitude for you coming in today because this hits like especially home for me. I've gone to all white schools like my whole life. I never really saw people that looked like me, especially not hearing these stories. I've tried to commit my time, at least in the past recent years during like BLM, trying to educate the people in my community, educate my friends and my family about the atrocities that black people have endured in this country, because I'm a first-generation American. My family, they're from the Caribbean. They don't know a lot about the history here. And I know when I go outside, no one's looking at me and thinking, oh, she's not from here. They're thinking, oh, she's a regular black person. So these things affect me every day, even if I don't have direct lineage. So yeah, I just wanted to express how like appreciative I am of this opportunity and having you come in and tell these people's stories, because there's some things that you talked about that I didn't even know about, even though I've been doing my research and been advocating and been going to these kinds of like sessions where people talk about these things.
Thank you. And keep searching for truth. Because although your family is not from here, they have their own battles to deal with in the sugarcane plantations.
Antoinette, that was so moving, so
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. Thank Rob. Thank all of you. And I hope that what you have learned here today really inspire each of us to be a better person and to believe in the liberties of freedom and freedom for all. As Dr. King said in my closing, none of us are free until we all are free. And when I look at the robots that's taking over what it is right now, we got a whole different beast to deal with. So let's unify ourselves as human beings and not robots. Thank you.